Hello everyone, welcome to Lokmanya. My name is Mark Kinra and this is our continuing episode where we discuss about human rights issues of Uyghurs outside of China. And for highlighting this important aspect, our guest is Mr. Salih Hudayar. Mr. Hudayar is PM of East Turkestan government in exile and has been advocating independence of East Turkestan. He is also the founder of East Turkestan National Awakening Movement. Turkey shares a strong bond with Uyghurs. Uyghurs are ethnically Turkic people and their language is closely related to Turkish. In 2009, Turkish President Erdogan called Chinese repression of Uyghurs a genocide. Turkey has long shown solidarity with Uyghurs when they start granting them asylum in 1952. But since then, a lot has changed. Hudayar, welcome sir.
Thank you for having me.
Mr. Hudayar, my first question to you. Turkey under President Erdogan has a history of using militants in various countries. A recent example was of Syrian mercenaries against Armenia. Do you think Uyghurs are being used in the same way?
Yes, firstly, before I answer your question, I don't mean to interject, but I want to correct your statement earlier. In 2009, President Erdogan, he stated that what China was doing against the Uyghurs was like a genocide. He never actually called it a genocide. He stated it was like a genocide. And subsequently, the Chinese government, they called the Turkish ambassador, and then they had high-level meetings with Turkey. In fact, in 2010, China and Turkey signed a 10-point strategic agreement. And this agreement involves, intelligence sharing, military cooperation, intelligence cooperations, economics, trade, tourism, etc. And coming back to your question, this is where it comes back into your question. Yes, Turkey has been using Uyghurs as mercenaries, or more frankly, as cannon fodder in Syria. And this we can see directly, with the Turkestan Islamic Party, which is a Uyghur jihadist group based, well, technically they're based both in Syria and supposedly in Afghanistan or Pakistan. We genuinely think that the TIP was something that was a Chinese intelligence, something that was created by the Chinese intelligence to portray Uyghurs as terrorists. So coming back to your question, following 2010 with the strategic agreement that Turkey signed, Turkey started having the Syrian, getting involved in the Syrian conflict in 2011. And by 2013, you had foreign jihadists from all across the world coming into Syria. And among those, you had Uyghurs, and an estimated of, around 20,000 Uyghurs, and this includes, the militants and then their families, coming into Syria from Turkey. But how did they get to Turkey is one question that many people to this day have not really addressed. In 2013, 2014, the security apparatus in East Turkestan is very much, similar to what the situation is today. It would be virtually impossible for, tens of thousands of Uyghurs to flee into, through China into Southeast Asia, and then from there into Turkey without Chinese intelligence knowing. Once these people, they got, crossed thousands of miles through China, magically or mysteriously evading Chinese security forces and intelligence, making their way into Southeast Asia, where they were then given Turkish passports and flown to Turkey, and then from Turkey to Syria, and then used, by, the areas in which they operate in Syria. Like, for example, the Turkestan Islamic Party, it operates in Latakia and in Idlib, which is right there on the Turkish border. And these groups were used by the Turkish intelligence to, what we believe by the Turkish intelligence, to as cannon fodder to fight against both the Assad regime, but also to fight against the Kurds. And many right now there's thousands of Uyghur women and children that are detained in the Al Hol refugee camp, which is controlled by the Kurds in Syria, which is under their control. Because many of these people, the women and children, they were the wives and children of the Uyghur militants, jihadists that had been captured fighting against the Kurds. So there's one aspect of this. Another aspect of this is the Chinese using this, the Chinese government pointing to the fact that that Uyghurs were in Syria. It used this as the excuse to lock up millions of people into concentration camps by saying, oh, there are Uyghurs in Syria, and because of this, now we need to lock up, millions of people into concentration camps or re-education camps and make them, de-radicalize them, de-extremize them, etc. So it was a win-win situation for both Turkey and China.
So it's a kind of a vicious circle where they first, Chinese have been throwing them into Pakistan, Afghanistan, and when they turned, when there was some radicalization which has happened in the community, now they are again saying that, okay, fine, now you have to de-radicalize.
Yes, and this is part of China's long-standing strategy. Prior to really the really up until 2001, China would never use the term terrorism to describe the Uyghurs, or they wouldn't describe them as terrorists. They would describe them historically as foreign devils, counter-revolutionaries, ethnic nationalists, and separatists. However, upon after 9/11, China began to capitalize off of the global war on terror by claiming that it was fighting against terrorism, and effectively they've sent Uyghurs, allowed Uyghurs, and in fact sent Uyghurs to countries like Pakistan, Afghanistan, and allowed them to as part of Chinese intelligence operation to portray Uyghurs as terrorists, because they need to legitimize the genocide that they're undertaking. In 2009, for example, the Pakistani Islamic Party, or the Jamaat-e-Islam of Pakistan, they signed a strategic cooperation agreement with China. And in fact, the leader of the Pakistan's Jamaat at that time stated that the Chinese had invited them to preach Islam in China. And so if you see where this is going, this is a deliberate thing. And even in Afghanistan and Syria, the Uyghurs, we only have one enemy. Our enemy is China. Our enemy is not NATO. Our enemy is not the US, or not the Syrian, the Kurds or the Syrians, etc. But to portray Uyghurs as terrorists in the international community, the Chinese government, through its intelligence network, through its close relationships with terrorist groups like Al-Qaeda, terrorist groups like the Taliban and so forth, and others, it was able to get Uyghurs, brainwash them, send them to these areas, and then to portray the overall struggle as terrorism. More recently, this past November and December, I think it's past December, the Afghan intelligence, they captured about 10 Chinese spies that were meeting with terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda, like the Haqqani network and the Taliban, to try to create a fake East Turkestan Islamic movement in order to portray Uyghurs as terrorists. And although the reports didn't indicate much about why they were trying to do this, around the same time, towards the end of December, the U.S. President Trump at that time revealed that the Chinese were meeting with certain Chinese intelligence were meeting with certain non-state actors, radical militant groups, and try to get them to attack U.S. forces. So again, this is to, the US has been the most vocal on the East Turkestan Uyghur issue. And so China is trying to push back against this by, trying to create Uyghur or radical groups, or try to get Islamist groups like the Haqqani network, like Al Qaeda and others, to use Uyghurs, or to do it, carry out attacks themselves and then blame it on the Uyghurs.
Right. So, do you think that is there any relation between East Turkestan Islamic movement and the Turkestan Islamic Party in Syria?
So many people think that, the East Turkestan Islamic movement, for example, this group was first mentioned on November 11, 2001, 2 months after 9/11, when China, at the UN Security Council, they stated that they were victims of, East Turkestani terrorism. Before that, there is no mention of this group. There has been no group calling itself, the East Turkestan Islamic movement. It essentially became a scapegoat, for the Chinese government to portray, the broad East Turkestan independence movement, which unfortunately has the same acronym as, the East Turkestan Islamic movement,
Right.
to label our movement as a terrorist movement. The TIP, the Turkestan Islamic Party, it used to be called the East Turkestan Islamic Party back in like the late 1998, 97, 98 is when it was set up in Afghanistan, under, the protection of the Taliban. But the thing here is, at that time, China had very close relationships with the Taliban. They were through Huawei, they were supplying them, communications, weapons, and other things. So if China if the ETIP, or the East Turkestan Islamic Party, at that time had been a threat to China, they could have easily asked the Taliban to get rid of these at most couple hundred Uyghur militants under the ETIP in Afghanistan. But of course, that would not be in China's interest, because at that time we had a national movement taking place, and so the Chinese government desperately needed to show our movement, as not as a national movement, but to portray it as like a global terrorist movement. TIP, the group, and like ETIP's leader Hassan Makhzoom, he was killed in 2003, apparently by Pakistani special forces. We don't really know the full details of what exactly happened. And then the group just kind of disappeared. And then it reemerged right about, when the 2008 Beijing Olympics were, about to take place, as, the Turkestan Islamic Party. Instead, this time removing the East from its part, its name, and making it more broad, as we want to establish, an Islamic state in all of Central Asia, thereby making not only, not only making Uyghurs the enemies of China, but also of all Central Asian, countries. And we genuinely believe that we think this is a Chinese intelligence creation. It wasn't until 2013 that the TIP, or the Turkestan Islamic Party, began to become active when they were, in Syria. And again, this was because of thousands of people being, mysteriously, evading Chinese intelligence and security forces, and ending up in Turkey, and then being shipped into, Idlib and Latakia.
There are reports that Popular Front of India, an extremist Islamic organization, have been engaging with Humanitarian Relief Foundation of Turkey, known as IHH, who have been accused of promoting terrorism in other countries and have been banned in several countries. Reading this collusion, do you think this is a worrisome trend for India?
Absolutely. I think this is alarming. I think India needs to, pay more attention to this issue, and take necessary precautionary measures. From what I've read about the IHH, they were actually involved in being an intermediary for the Turkish national intelligence, with various militant groups in Syria. In fact, in 2014, they were supposedly sending a convoy of humanitarian aid, the IHH, to Syria, but upon police for they stopped this and searched the trucks and found weapons. So this is very worrying. And many countries, for example, like Turkey and others, and not just Turkey but other countries, they don't want to directly, with their intelligence, directly reach out to certain organizations, especially if they're doing, covert action. So they will use other groups, front groups like the IHH to act as an intermediary. So in this regard, how I personally view, and this is my own opinion, um, you know, it's not the IHH reaching out to the PFI. I see it as the Turkish intelligence reaching out to the PFI. And with the current, Turkish regime under Erdogan, with what the threats that he's made against India regarding Kashmir, this is something absolutely worrisome and that India needs to pay more attention to.
My last question to you. Turkey has signed an extradition treaty with China, which leave Uyghurs at the mercy of Turkey. Do you think that behind this exploitation there is a mutual beneficial arrangement between Turkey and China?
Absolutely. This agreement was actually originally, signed in 2017 secretly, and it has to be ratified. China just recently ratified it, and they're pressuring the Turkish government to ratify this treaty. So essentially, what this treaty would do, China would be able to have any Uyghur in Turkey that it deems a threat to itself be deported under this extradition treaty. And while at the same time, Turkey has already used, Uyghurs in Syria, and at the same time, under this treaty, now that it's, done using them, if they're done using them, they can dispose of them as, a bunch of terrorists and deport them to China, where they will definitely be, executed, if not, put into the concentration camps and prisons. But at the same time, Turkey has been using this as a leverage tool to gain more, economic benefits from China, to gain more, funds, loans, and investments. And in fact, China has been also using this to, pressure, Turkey, saying that, withholding earlier they had withholded, the delivery of the coronavirus vaccines, Chinese coronavirus vaccines to Turkey, unless they, ratified this treaty. But however, it seems that there are deep, negotiations going between the Chinese government and Turkey over this issue. If the Erdogan regime, continues to remain in power, it's going to be very difficult for Uyghurs, and quite frankly, Turkey is not a safe country for Uyghurs anymore. Historically, Turkey had never really supported, the East Turkestan cause. The reason I say this is, accepting refugees is one thing. The only reason that they accepted refugees in 1952 was because probably of pressure from NATO. And when Turkey joined NATO, the US probably pressured Turkey to take in these Uyghurs. Those Uyghurs were never, given, the same type of opportunities, education, and, given, ability to build their community, build, democratic institutions like the Tibetan, exile community in India. Turkey could have well have done that, but Turkey's interest was to just, keep them there, and occasionally the Turkish government and Turkish media will inflame the East Turkestan issue, only to use it, as a leverage to gain, economic and political favors from China. That's the only time. Other than that, the Turkish people themselves are very sympathetic, but the government not so much. For them, we're just a playing card.
Right. So thank you very much for your time today, Mr. Hudayar. Hope to see you soon again and we'll discuss more on the Uyghur issue. And thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.